Braxton Winston at large.
Tariq Bokhari, District 6.
So, Donata, do we have Mr. Graham?
Mr. Graham is not on.
All right.
I'll locate him.
And do you know what the chair's issue is, the Mayor Pro Tem?
I'm sorry, say that again, Mr. Driggs?
Do you know what her issue is joining this call?
Yes, I do. And I'm helping her right now. She should be about to join.
All right, maybe I'll just kick off for a minute while we wait for her. The purpose of this group is to think about public support, city support for the arts in Charlotte. And our goal is to kind of step back and take a big picture view of the situation that we're in and where we want to be and how we should move forward. And I think I will mention that we have a near-term issue in that we are in the middle of a budget process and we'll need to make decisions very soon about how we support the arts in the current budget process. And then there will be a kind of bigger picture, longer term discussion about what the vision for culture should be in our city and how the city should support it. So my own view is pending there she is. Madam Chair, I just said that we were going to consider a vision for culture in Charlotte and that we had a near-term issue in our current budget cycle of how to fund the arts and needed to engage in a larger scale, longer term project to determine where we want to go going forward. And you are muted, Madam Chair.
And I apologize, I couldn't get the password in here to get in on time. So I missed the very first part of your introduction, Mr. Driggs. But I think, so if all of you have comments on what Mr. Driggs said, go ahead, because I didn't get the opportunity to hear the first part.
Again, all we did is we had introductions and I said that in general, the purpose of this group was to consider public support, city support for the arts and what our vision should be for culture in Charlotte going forward. And I said that we had a near-term issue in our current budget cycle of deciding how to fund the arts, and that we also had a kind of larger scale and probably longer term need to consider what the structure should be in the future. So that's as far as we've got.
Okay, and that's really the point of having the mayor organize this group for us is to really address that two-part question. What are we going to do in the near term to really stabilize the arts organizations, especially coming out of COVID? We put money into helping these groups out with our CARES Act money, but we know that that's not solving a problem that was there to begin with. And so the other issue is that really from this group, I hope that we can get to a point where we agree that we need a new vision for our community on what arts and culture is, and how we go about funding that as a community, not just public sector, but private sector as well. I shared with you guys some of the different initiatives or plans that some of the other cities, our peer cities, have gone through in the past couple of years to look at updating their culture plans. And it's clear that what culture plans meant to us years ago aren't the same anymore. We know that workplace giving has gone away, but we also know that what we consider to be arts and culture has changed as well. So I hope this is an effort to really embark upon a way to be supportive, to have a broader community conversation with other stakeholders as to what arts and culture are, and how we can both support them in a very sustainable way. Do we have any comments from, is Mr. Graham on, or is he not on today?
He wasn't on a few minutes ago.
Okay. And he would be the fifth, for anybody who's watching this, he is the fifth member of this ad hoc committee. And so with that, if Mr. Bakari or Mr. Winston have any comments to make, and I hope that you guys had a chance to take a look at some of the information we sent out.
So, Madam Chair, if I could just try to frame the conversation a little bit. In my mind, how this needs to work is we need to kind of look at the existing situation, the investments we have now, the art scene as it exists now, identify some of the most urgent needs. For example, the symphony, I think, is on the brink of bankruptcy. We need to consider our current funding, the debt service that we pay, the operating grants that we provided in the past, and we need to look at arts programs in other cities, as you suggested. I think then what we will need to do is come up with criteria for measuring how we should scale our investment. So we'll be thinking about things like economic development, tourism, education, quality of life, and our city's desire to be perceived as a world-class city, which does entail having a vibrant scene in the arts. So what are the metrics for that? And how do we take those goals and translate them into a level of investment? Then we'll also need to think about the administration of the investment. I think there's a general feeling that, especially because of the fact that workplace giving is dried up, our existing model probably needs to be modified. We need to kind of take a fresh look at how we do this, and therefore consider what kind of private giving we can create by virtue of our own investment, where that might come from. Things that we will need to think about in that are the continuing role of the Arts and Science Council, how we administer our funding, the funding that we do provide, the support for arts activity beyond the major programs such as symphony and ballet. And I will mention, since I'm aware that Mr. Winston in particular has expressed the need for us to consider the people who work in this industry, who basically provide all kinds of support services and are engaged as well in the arts community. I think there needs to be a social context in which we look at this. The Arts and Science Council in a board meeting recently acknowledged that its history of being inclusive in the way it went about funding the arts was poor. And I'm sure that will be something we want to think about. So I offer that just as kind of an attempt to create some structure in this conversation. We can't really just kick this thing around. We're going to need to think about those things. I think we may want to enlist some staff support in providing data or other input, and try to get to a point where we've identified a cultural plan, a level of investment that we think is appropriate in relation to the returns we can expect for the city, and then a way of administering that. So just wanted to throw that out there as a kind of starting point for a conversation.
Yeah, and I think, and Mr. Graham is on now. So welcome, Mr. Graham. Thanks for joining us. I think that what I would hope that we get to is that we would agree we need a cultural plan, but we need help doing that. So, I don't think the five of us can come up with a cultural plan and a vision. We can facilitate having voices of our stakeholders in the community. So as a committee, I would say that in the next few meetings, we invite some of the specialists, if you will, industry specialists in the community, artists, patrons, people that have been involved in the arts to share with us at the ground level what they consider to be important in terms of a vision for the city, and that it would be our job to facilitate that conversation. But I don't know that we have the skill set to come up with a culture plan. I think we're going to need to get some help to do that. And feel free if any, and that's in the long term. So, Mr. Winston.
Yes, I agree with Mr. Driggs' statement that we have to have a structured conversation around this, and that we should figure out a very important primary goal of this committee should be how do we bucket the work and have some type of workflow moving forward. I would say that I think we need to honestly step back from some of the approaches that have been mentioned so far in this committee. I think we need to rely on the things that we do well, and which is economic development. It's creating, cultivating environments for industries to flourish. We do not do charity well. We do not do philanthropy well. If we are landlords, I don't think it is our role to kind of drive into the business models of our tenants to try to save them. What we do well, like I said, is economic development. And we know, for instance, when I came on council 3 years ago, we were the 17th largest media market. Today, I believe we are the 15th largest media market. We know that we have been attracting businesses around that. For instance, our relationships with Tepper Sports, as we are becoming more of a landing place for Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, understanding the different industries that we already have here, financial services, fintech. We have a robust sports and entertainment industry. We have a lot of government activity and education. We should be focused on growing that media market. I would argue that we actually do have a lot of experts and converse and resources within our team and close partners to approach it like that, but we just need to decide to do so. As the other conversations over the past years of public investment in the arts has brought up, I think, a lot of evidence that we already know. We know that we have lots of folks that work in the arts and cultural realm. We also know that they face the barriers that they face, the barriers of affordable workspaces, the barriers to affordable housing, pay and wages that are not able to make ends meet. But if we go from the grassroots all the way up to the grass tops, I think it does, again, play in the same space that we work well. It's all about economic development, making industries, and in the end, generating revenue that can be reinvested into that ecosystem. So I hope that's the approach we try to take.
So, Mr. Winston, I don't think there's a contradiction between what you said and what I said. My concern is taking ideas like yours and bringing them down to a tangible plan, like an amount of money, a distribution process. And I think the way that we do the distribution, like where the distribution goes, is going to be informed by considerations like you described. So, yeah,
I guess to be clear, I don't think our efforts need to be focused on specific institutions, saving them or changing their business models for them. I think if we aim bigger, and I think that's where we already work well. Yes, we will rely on public-private partnerships to do things, but our public investment does not do charity well. It does not do philanthropy well. And we should be looking to get the return on our investments that we do in other economic development deals, because it's highly possible, I believe.
So how would that thought process lead to an identification of actual grant beneficiaries and disposition of public funding?
Well, if we bring jobs in the arts and cultural industries to Charlotte, that will create the environment that I think serves the best and highest good to get people jobs that provide living wages, that provide a more stable future, that is what we do well. And that's the approach I think we should be taking.
So don't disagree with that either. I think the jobs that you're talking about are actually kind of offered by employers. So if we talk about the symphony, in terms of what you're saying, we can look upon them as an employer, and we can say, okay, what are the job implications of supporting, say, the symphony? But at some point, we're going to have to start writing checks to somebody.
Correct.
The question is, how do we achieve your job priority by the way that we distribute our funds?
So I would say when I do sit on the board of trustees of the symphony, I would disagree that they're on the brink of and on the brink of bankruptcy, just from some insider information. But I think, again, this is a perfect example. We go higher. We don't focus on the symphony. If we want to talk about getting symphony or classical music, people associated with classical music, more jobs, we got to look at how do we grow the music production industry, right? Where are the opportunities for musicians and people associated with the music industry to get jobs in here? That might be how, we might look at, I don't know, there might be some market share that we can grab from the recording industry. There might be a market that we can grab from any number of segments that go into the professional music sector. If we look at that on the higher level, not only we would be helping the people that are currently part of the symphony, but all types of different professional musicians that are here now and that we would want to come to our city in the future.
Again, I don't disagree with any of that. I'm sort of, as the budget committee chair, I'm concerned that in a month or two, we need to come up with an amount of money and how we're going to spend it. So I'm kind of focused on that, and I don't see any conflict between that priority and what you're saying. I'm interested to know if other members of the committee would care to chime in. I mean, how do you see this working? Mr. Bakari.
Thanks. Yeah, and I agree with almost everything I've heard from all you guys so far. I just think it's different angles of the same issue. I'm going to read what Rick Thurman put together. If you don't know Rick, was with Charlotte Center City Partners, but he's been a big collaborator for myself, Councilman Eggleston, and many others with the Music Everywhere initiative. And I asked him to put some thought into this as well. Shared Julie some of the other city plans and things that was our kind of offline reading, and he teed it up with something that I might as well not try to recreate. I'll just say it because he says it perfectly. What is the crux of the issue? Is it to figure out a way to subsidize operations of legacy arts organizations and institutions so that they may become resilient to future shocks, sustain and thrive in the future, innovate all the way that drives equity outcomes? Or is it to design a city that values art, culture, and creativity at its core, to become a city that deeply understands the community and economic value that arts, culture, and creativity drive, and therefore develops a system that ensures the arts, culture, and creativity thrive in the future? Both ideas have merit. I would argue that the second is the true vision that the much of city can see themselves in and get behind. The first is merely one of several strategies nestled within that vision. In short, the question isn't how do we fund arts and culture? The question is, what kind of city do we want to be? So, I mean, that just resonated deeply with me because it goes back to what I think a lot of us that found ourselves on the opposition side of the referendum and the arts tax were like, it's not that we don't value arts, it's that we don't see a material change in the way it's operated for decades. We see a new marketing spin on how we're going to justify funding to keep that occurring. So that's my theoretical million miles up view, right? now to get tactical to Mr. Driggs' point, we have a short amount of time where we are one of many roles in which, to Julie's point, we are not going to define culture and what that is. We can only be our part. So the lens I hope to bring forth productively with you guys is how in this special purpose committee can we come to a conclusion understanding that we won't define culture and we won't be able to define the ultimate roadmap that makes this community value it and makes the ROI relevant, whether we subsidize or not. But we have an amount of money, much of which we've spent in the past for a lot of years, and we don't do well telling this community where we already spend it and bringing all that together and say, this is where we're going to invest, and this is how we're going to incentivize that money so that the outcomes we want occur. And those outcomes are a city that values this at its core and uses it for economic development, uses it for all these things, but we didn't come and try to micromanage what those lists were. So that's a nice touchy-feely way of making it sound good. The devil's obviously in the details, but I think our approach is, having tough conversations. Julie, you and I talked about this before it's, to me, even as a conservative, I will say I'm good with the fact that a thriving city's art scene has to be subsidized in some way, right? But that there can be ROIs and different things that are a little more indirect that come back around that we can justify. But more importantly, we have a candid discussion to say, all right, well, how much can be subsidized? And because everyone kind of just stops the conversation there, and then beneath that, a lot of folks say, well, I'm in that subsidized camp versus not. So I just think that we can have a debate and come up with 3, 4, or 5 strings that are attached to what we're going to do. And some of those strings might go in the budget to Tracy Dodson's group to say, go become, an economic recruiter for arts and for that ROI or whatever. Another string or angle might be, here's money that we're willing to put up against private sector matching to fund this as long as this happens. And that way we don't hit a moving goalpost for the private sector partners and others that are here. We say, here's what we value. And we know we aren't the only party in the room that can say, this is what it takes to make a city value arts, or this is how we define our culture. But it at least ties the strings to our money, because even though this isn't a referendum, I feel obligated to continue forth the dialogue of many folks that ended up opposing this who would have supported it had it been done differently. And I think we can get there.
Mr. Graham, do you have any comments you'd like to add?
Yeah, I do. I'm just sitting here listening, taking notes, trying to take it all in. I guess my first comment is I'm glad that we're having this conversation about how we support the arts in our community, because I fundamentally believe that, as Mr. Winston has said, at a higher level, that the arts and science and our support of them also have wide economic development value to it, right? And so I believe we should support the arts. I believe we need to find a way to do it. I think the preamble that the chairman outlined at the very beginning of the meeting makes a lot of sense to me. I only caution us as we kind of move forward is that, one, we apply the KISS simple theory, which is to keep it simple. And not try to make this thing overly complicated from what it is that we're trying to do. That we do, as Mr. Braxton suggests, grass top and grassroots. That we can't talk about one without the other, but we don't have to make it complicated, right? There is a need to redefine the arts and redefine some of the players that are involved in it. I love NODA and some of the small venues over there as well. I think that makes a thriving arts community that expands beyond the boundaries of Uptown. Obviously, I wish there were more venues in University City. Right? I mean, we don't want arts just in one portion of the city. We want it throughout the community. And so I just hope that we would really try to identify a framework that works in that we keep it simple and narrowly tailored and focus on the broader mission of what I think this committee which is, do we value the arts? And if the answer is yes, to what extent do we demonstrate that value programmatically, financially, and as a city, as an institution? How do we do that?
Madam Chair, could I respond
Please.
to Mr. Bakari? For one, I really liked your quote. And I think what I heard was that the quote itself said there are two different ways of looking at this. And arguably the first one is kind of a subset of the second. So I look upon this as sort of analogous to our 2040 plan in UDO. Like we think about what kind of a city we want to be or what the role is of culture in the city. And then we get into how that translates into funding or to structures that we might adopt. I also wanted to mention, I don't think the failure of the bonds that the county offered, the tax increase that the county offered, was really a reflection of public view towards the arts so much as it was a reflection of the defects in the way that was offered. For one, the arts funding was actually a minority of the total tax increase, and two, there was no guarantee about how the funds would be used after the inception of the tax increase. So I think we have a kind of an open field in terms of public perception of the arts, and I think if we come out with a vibrant culture plan, we will find that we can get private sector support and public buy-in for the plan.
Yeah, I think that's all a great point. I'll catch you just a second, Mr. Winston. I just want to follow up on that. I think, when I would hear conversations about the arts tax, I heard one person say, well, wait a minute, I thought it meant we would have more music classes in schools. And I thought it might mean that we might get more geographically oriented programming, right, in different parts of towns, in the university area, whatnot. And what that told me is that there was a lot more out there that people wanted in an arts program, in a cultural vision that wasn't being addressed the first time around. So I think we have this opportunity to do that, because if you go geographically, what people want from the arts is going to vary greatly. It might be geographically, it might be by age, if you're the parent of school-age children or whatnot. And so we've got to give the stakeholders, the public, the artists, the patrons, the ability to weigh in on what they think this culture plan should be and what the priorities of the plan should be. What you guys have mentioned, Mr. Winston, Mr. Bakari, really would be pillars of a cultural plan, of a cultural vision. And so we've got to get to that point to be able to have that conversation. And I would like to use future meetings to bring some of the folks in, to bring Rick in, Mr. Bakari, and talk about that a little bit more, so that we can get grassroots support and support at the top. I think when I was on the Arts and Science Council board, I remember the former executive director talking about the fact that 80% of the funding came from the Wedge. And the Wedge was talking about how they didn't have theaters down in Ballantyne. So there is a mismatch that still exists there between a lot of the patrons of the arts and where the programming is going, i.e. mostly uptown. A lot of people, want it in their communities. And so there's a lot of conversation that has to be had about where arts are performed and in what form. So, but I think in the meantime, the most immediate goal we have is to stabilize what we have. And that's to our budget chair's point. We're going to have the opportunity to have this discussion in our budget. I hope that we would all agree we should at least continue to fund the arts at the level that we have operationally, and perhaps increase it, knowing that a lot of them are in trouble. And, that would be the most immediate action that we would take in this year's budget. We've just had our first budget workshop. I don't know, maybe the budget chair would know when this conversation would come up, but we've got to have some stability so that we can then go in and start to talk about a long-term plan that kind of turns it on its head and starts re-envisioning what we consider to be arts and culture and how we support it.
All right. I think before we start bringing artists and the community into our workflow, it is going to be very important that we define for ourselves and the community what it is that we want to do. We had a lack of support from, honestly, the arts community for the arts tax because it wasn't clear how they would benefit. They are honestly tired of being brought into panels, into discussions that bodies like ours are having because they just continue to feel unheard. They've been telling us what they need for years and budget cycles. For instance, I don't think they'll be very warm if we identify straight off the bat that what we need to do first is to stabilize the major institutions. We've been saying that, for forever, and still, doing the same thing over and over again. Again, it's one aspect of insanity. But I will to Mr. Drigg's first point about the streams. Can I kind of take a stab at proposing maybe some pillars that we can work in? On a grassroots level, our housing and an affordable workspace issue for existing artists that exists here in Charlotte right now. And if we could have more affordable housing and affordable workspace, kind of innovative investments in there, I think that would go a long way to stabilizing what we already have. And there are models of out there that look at things from a hard housing and neighborhood development perspective. Next, I think, as it was said here, we do need to redefine what the public-private partnership is and what it looks like moving forward and what its goals are. I think that's it's been part of the conversation of many of the colleagues. Next, I think we do have a bucket around the development of economic development approach. How do we support that? As Mr. Bakari mentioned, is this a budget item that needs to say, hey, Tracy needs some resources to go out and figure out how do you take market share from different cities and make us more competitive on that scale. Then I think we also look at as some internal budgetary support. How do we use our resources internally to do things? And it's come up in some of the threads around a poet laureate or maybe artists in residence to, again, show examples of how do you get cash into artists' hands now? How do you produce stuff that is community building? Maybe that's something that we do talk about as a city council as a whole. And lastly, what is our intergovernmental approach? As it was said, as I think we all have said, as it related to the referendum last year, there was things that could have been done in the realm of possibilities, but people couldn't really get behind it because there were no commitments by different branches of government. So if we really do, I think we really should take the lead and bring the schools, the county, and other governmental agencies that would be helpful in defining this for us moving forward. The state, obviously the state, when you talk about things like tax credits and whatnot, I think we have to have a big tent here, and we should take the lead. So again, I'll just affordable housing and affordable workspaces, redefining the public-private partnership, an economic development strategy around this, internal budgetary support, and taking the lead on an intergovernmental strategy around this.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Winston. I think I got all of those. Any comments?
Mayor Pro Tem, if I might. Let me just, and I'm going to share this with all of you afterwards. And again, what I had read earlier was just the kind of intro from Rick Thurman, who I think all of us know, and it's the Music Everywhere initiative that has been going on for years. So it has a lot of jumpstart there, but it's focusing on an industry that is very often forgotten in these broader arts conversations and left to their own abilities to be able to kind of push it forward. Reading his analysis when I sent him, Mayor Pro Tem, your lists of the different cities' approaches, really made me realize that, and maybe this is something we can take away tactically with our effort now, is arts, saying arts and culture is like a huge brush of which each of these sub-verticals in there have massively different needs. So I will let me just read a couple other quick excerpts out of his part. And this is around music venues, musical artists, but I think it gives a sense of like the work that's gone in here, but also the differences that we see others. Music doesn't need ongoing operational support. It needs public investment in hard and soft infrastructure, or at the very least, public recognition of music assets and an understanding of what it takes to protect, preserve, and grow those assets. For example, what policies will ensure that legacy venues are protected? How can we ensure that musicians can afford to live here? How can we support the incubation of new music businesses? The list just goes on there. Humble suggestion. If Charlotte undertakes a broad cultural plan like the ones referenced here, those ones from the cities that we saw, Boston and more, roll in the Charlotte Music Ecosystem Study and Action Plan that we released in 2019. We did tons of engagement. We worked with a renowned consultant. The plan is community-based and designed to be community-led. We've been working off that plan since we published it. And he goes forth with more analysis. You'll all enjoy reading this, but let me just read a few ideas and think about them tactically from here's one important vertical in arts, the music and venue industry, but also I think, there's something to be said about each of the sub-verticals that makes up arts and culture, going from, again, grassroots to grass tops, each needing their own customized plan and mechanism to solve for it. So here you go. Subsidized rehearsal space. I won't go into all the details. You'll get the punchlines. Help fund a music business incubator. Legacy venue protection, preserve and protect. Funding of artist development programs, business workshop mentoring. Micro grants to music creatives to create. We're focused on collaboration. Big idea. Support development of and operations of a Charlotte Music Hub, full service resource center. Our research shows people would attend more live music if it was closer to their homes. Integrate this thinking into planning and zoning. Music wayfinding. So these are all amazing. Half that stuff doesn't even cost that much. It's the fact of the matter that we look at a vertical by the group of people that are in that vertical, battling it out by themselves every day, and we make that part of a more comprehensive plan. Again, going back to where we all open this of, let's not find a way just to fund essentially the same model that's worked for decades and decades and decades here when the world is changing around us. Let's look at each one individually, not solve it for them, but figure out ways to tie strings to essentially what we're seeing to say, okay, if you believe that'll happen if we do it, how do you measure it? How do we measure it? And how do we fund it?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I guess essentially what you're saying is you take that plan and apply it to different verticals of theater, of visual arts, of whatever it is, right? Is that what you're saying?
But
so
not the plan, rather the thought
the
process of his premise is a lot of the other groups, and we know this for a fact, their big struggle is OpEx, funding their operations on a regular basis. It's the exact opposite in the music and venue industry, where it's preserving, whether it was last year and preserving music venues during this time, or more importantly, it's about facilitating the scene. But again, that is an absent topic that has never really truly existed in our broader top-down arts and culture funding mechanism, and it has found a way to somewhat thrive despite of that. So imagine, it's just a view of okay, so what other things are we forgetting that need to be in here? And of the things that are in there, it's zero-based budgeting almost from a cultural strategy perspective.
any other comments? I'm letting that sink in because
it's a lot. Yeah, I'll send it to you. You can all digest it.
And I guess my thought is, how do we, I mean, I know Mr. Graham is saying, let's keep it simple, but this doesn't seem simple to me. This seems really, really complicated.
Well,
I'm okay with that.
Well, let me, Mr. Winston, if you don't mind, just one sentence on that. I think it's complicated if we tried to reinvent what Music Everywhere did for the last 3 years. It is not complicated if we trust in what they've done. And then our one part is, okay, well, this amount of money can go to some of the things you've recommended, and here are our strings attached, which could be public-private partnership. It could be you meet these metrics. Like, we keep our part simple. This whole thing is never going to be simple.
yeah,
Got it.
and that is why I say, let's find ways to approach it from things that we do well, right? It's not simple in the fact that there's a lot of different buckets, as Mr. Bakari said, that you can deal with. But it is pretty simple in the fact that, like you said, we have experts on the ground doing the work, and we have all these kind of points on the map. Our job as a government is to figure out how to connect those things, right? Bringing Greenwell here was very difficult, right, in general, but it's in our wheelhouse because we have the people with the experts that do those things. We've cultivated this environment and a team to get this type of investment in our community. Now we have to do the same for arts and culture so that the 11 of us don't have to, be, elbow deep in it, getting dirty. We're letting the experts, really carry their weight.
So that for me, and maybe you guys have this figured out, but for me, it brings up the question of who does that, right? Like, who helps us redo that structure so that we are, so that we're connecting the dots of those of us who fund it, right? And the process for getting it in that vertical structure, i.e. the plan of a Music Everywhere model.
Well, I think we have to, from the economic development standpoint, it's like when we, a couple of years ago, when we decided, hey, we don't have the right incentives in place to bring fintech here. We need to tell, economic development to bring us back, some recommendations for how we're set up, what we need in place to effectively go out and build this industry. So I think that's, again, where we start. Again, that's why I tried to just bucket it into a couple different things. I think we also give it to, for instance, Pam, right? Say, hey, what ideas are out there that really focus on affordable housing and affordable workspaces for artists? Those things exist. Intergovernmental, same thing. Dana, how do effective areas and regions, because we have to look at this from a regional standpoint, how do we engage the folks at CMS and the county, but also the folks up at the state, understanding not just politics, but again, what is Governor Cooper's Commerce Secretary looking at in terms of where do we align with those things? So if we just focus on doing the things that we do well and not try to reinvent the wheel here, I think we'll be fine.
Okay, Mr. Graham or Mr. Driggs, any comments?
I just wanted to ask Mr. Bakari if what he proposes is that we have some subset of the total funding that we might have in mind for culture that is specifically identified to respond to the ideas of the music industry, or are we supposed to generalize from their thoughts to a plan for culture overall?
Yeah, I'll give you a gut reaction, but I think that's what we as maybe a subcommittee need to really think. I think that's the crux of our debate. Like, back to Councilman Graham's perspective of keeping it simple on our side while also maximizing the results we want on the other more broad, complicated side. I think we have to ask ourselves, what's the easiest, simplest way that we can attach the strings that get to the outcomes we want from our side, but not overcomplicating it? So the perfect world is like, we say, all right, we define or divide the arts and culture universe in Charlotte into these 5 areas. And in a logical group like music and music venues is there, who's already been thinking about this, who probably already has 3/4 of what the problem is stated. They need to define the other quarter, and then with funding, they can figure more out. I don't know that it's going to be that clean because I think, you know, some of those other areas have been operating for a while and are very mature. So the question then, I think we get back to the crux of like, well, what's net new and is a vision? What's net new and doesn't have a vision yet and needs it? And who's the point person? And what has been operating for a long time and literally no one has started to even consider that it should change. And my fear is that last one is the one that gets the most of the subsidy today and the least conversation of what needs to change has occurred there. And while we can't wait around for that to all happen, I think we have to have the confidence that we have set the right strings in motion and look to the right point people to make all that happen, not just kick a can down the curb with that one topic and say, all right, well, until this runs out, you know, we won't hear from you.
Well, I think the reason we're here is precisely because we don't want to do that. The idea here is that we take a clean slate look at this, depart from past practices, update our thinking to reflect social changes and maybe a more modern view of what culture means. So this is a lateral thinking exercise of sorts. You know, we have to step out of the traditional modes. What I'm looking for in this conversation is for ideas that have been advanced here to be translated into suggestions for how we work, how we proceed. So if we take on board, Mr. Winston, your thoughts, what does it mean in terms of what we do at our next meeting?
Well, again, I think I would love to give some guidance to our staff to bring us back some information. For instance, when I first came on, I was giving forward a bunch of ideas around this concept of the super block that was formed in Manhattan. For instance, in the 1970s, there was a huge development that basically went bankrupt, and New York City, along with the federal government, funded it so that it to this day it provided affordable housing and affordable workspaces for artists. A portion of it was for folks that worked in the arts industry. A portion of it was for senior living, and other portion of it was for folks in the neighborhood that had special needs. And the idea was that, I mean, so many stars and people that have been successful in the industry as they lived in New York, going through that kind of ecosystem, have gone through these places. I'm talking about, you know, very recognizable names. Right on 42nd Street, right? So it solved the problem. Again, we have solutions out there that have been done and time and tested time and time again, but we haven't even explored that perspective again, like from our affordable housing frameworks. These are things that we haven't looked at, that if we gave guidance to our staff, they could go out there and get and bring us back, and we can decide what direction do we need to go.
So I agree that charging the staff with some research and asking them to bring us data, like things to look at and chew on as we have this conversation, makes a lot of sense. So if we can state clearly what we want them to do or what we need to see from them, that would obviously be very helpful. If we could get that in time for our next meeting.
If we were to decide on kind of buckets, like I think what you said at the first was very important. What does our workflow look like amongst the five of us? If we can kind of define that, and then I would be very, very happy to flesh out some suggestions of directions of guidance that we can give, and we can, whether it be in the next meeting or offline, agree to give guidance to staff so that we can facilitate a more kind of matter-of-fact conversation, and it isn't just kind of ideations, you know, thrown on the wall.
Okay, that sounds actionable. Ms. Bakari, what is your next step?
I need to think through, and perhaps we can have some brainstorms. I think giving some staff some guidance and some some discussions there would make a lot of sense. I think we need to have some people come who are the most likely prospects to be our single points of contact in each subvertical that has the knowledge, the authority, all the different topics to be potentially the partner. And I think we figure that out by inviting Rick, inviting these groups to come and present what they've been working on, what they know they need, how they represent it. We don't need to burn a lot of cycles on this because we obviously don't have a lot of cycles, but I think we need to come to a conclusion very quickly what the subverticals of arts and culture are in our ecosystem and who the logical candidates are for us to partner with. And some of them will be external traditional partners. Some of them may be internal staff members. To Councilman Winston's point around economic development, I mean, that's an angle, and we don't think very specifically about that, even though it comes up from time to time. So I think that highlighting that universe, picking where those folks are and quickly getting them in for us to have a very informal conversation with them and so the community can see as well. And we could say, all right, well, what's the ask? But right now, I think we've gotten a general sense of what the ask could be by what the run rate of the burn rate essentially is of the old model. So what is the new model? How's it going to change? And what's the ask for that? And I think we have to ask for some of the disruptors or the long time ignored parties in that model, like we've discussed today, to come and be a part of the dialogue, but quickly.
Well, I guess that's what I was saying, because I'm still trying to I'm just thinking mechanically on how, we agree that we've got these subverticals, but then who are the partners and who's the body that's working on this all the time, right? Nothing against staff, but we don't have that specialty, if you will. We have economic development, but the arts and culture are a lot more than economic development. So, we really don't have that that body right now. And so I'm just trying to figure out what that's going to look like, what it could look like as a permanent system structure going forward. Mr. Winston.
Well, I think the body is the market. Ultimately, government, an agency, they don't determine, what art and culture is and how it gets expressed in the community, right? Like the ability for concerts to come, as Mr. Bakari was kind of talking to, is going to be about, if they're able to sell tickets, if there is an active market for consumption of live music. And I think we have, the ingredients for that. It just needs to be mixed a little bit. Same thing for visual art. Same thing for poetry and writing and things like that. I don't think we get to determine that. So how can we work with the industry to make it so that it is working? It is working.
That's what I'm trying to say is the 5 of us or the 11 or 12 of us don't get to do that. We've got to have, but we have to have somebody that's organizing it.
But that is our primary responsibility as a city council, as a city government. Is one of the top 5 priorities is for the economic development of the city, right? Again, we're not experts in creating in the financial services industry or the industrials industry, but we work with experts to create the environment for those that type of business to thrive. And I think that
I think the staff the takeaway can be, it's a big question, but the takeaway can be pretty simple. And staff can do it in conjunction back and forth with us and the chairs here, which is break out the list, the subsets of what are the verticals of the arts and culture community, both traditionally that have been funded through the traditional models and others that are there that haven't been considered, and then list the potential parties and groups and people that could be there. And I think it's going to be quite evident to us, like the music one's real easy because Music Everywhere Initiative includes dang near everybody. It has a leadership group. It's a 501c3. Like that's going to be a no-brainer. Some of the other ones might be question marks. And I think those question marks are also answers for us. And I don't think we need to debate too long and hard about who it is. Like it'll be crystal clear, I think, when we look at that list, kind of who needs to come in and talk to us versus there may not be someone in that space.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, in terms of next steps, we've said that we need to ask staff to come back to us with some of that information, that data. I think next steps also have to be, what do we do this year in our budget? We've got to have that discussion. I personally don't think that we want to try to recreate the whole wheel right now, because we do have legacy organizations in this community that are important, and maybe their programming needs to change, and maybe how we fund them ultimately needs to change. But I do believe that there are some that are on the precipice of disaster if we don't make some kind of a commitment to doing things differently, but also to seeing them through this with their commitment that things will change. So we also have to figure out the very short-term solution to how we fund the arts in our fiscal 22 budget, fiscal year 22 budget. So let's have those side conversations.
I know we have to drop here, but my kind of comment to that one would be, I think if we treat everything we've been talking about up until now as a fast fail pilot for the next year, right? We will kill two birds with one stone. And that doesn't mean that we're going to come to a conclusion in this budget cycle that solves whoever, ballet, symphony, you name it, for the next 10 years. But it does mean that those with immediate woes that are part of this broader pilot are going to be potentially, hopefully, maybe given some extra runway as we concept out this whole methodology.
Okay, and I'll end that by saying that we really got to think about that, because I love what you guys are talking about, and I got to get myself more up to speed on that. But I can see where you're going with that. I think it's really innovative. But we've only, I think what we have to also remember is that we only fund $3.2 million for the entire arts and culture sector. We also fund the operation of buildings. And maybe we've had that backwards. I don't know, but those are our assets. I just want to finish, please. Those are our assets, and we've got to, we're the landlords, right? We don't want the buildings to be empty. So we got to keep that in mind as well. Go ahead, Mr. Winston.
I think one point of clarification. And this came out during the referendum. We have this work, I think, maybe out of Pam's shop. We invest way more than $3.2 million in the arts and cultural sector when it comes down to it. When we look at our budget year over year, this is why what I continue to say, we invest way more than that, but is it to the best and highest use? Because I think we would all agree no. So I think that's one of the important parts right there, Mayor Pro Tem. How do we look at our entire investment in this and using the tools, internal tools and internal specialties? How do we right size that? How do we make sure it's always at the best and highest use? But I agree with what you're saying. I just wanted to make that point of clarification because it's very important for our community to know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're right. We haven't gotten credit for all of that. So with that, it's 2:01, guys. So I appreciate your participation, your conversation, and it'll go on. And let's keep having the conversation. I know I have a lot to learn about this. And so I appreciate your all's expertise in this area. And I'm going to reach out myself to some of the others, to Rick, and try to understand better what some of these sub-verticals look like. So thanks, everybody.
Hey, Julie, can I ask one quick question before we leave?
Yeah.
I was just going through my notes and maybe I missed it. Is there a written charge for the committee?
Mr. Driggs, do you recall?
I'm not aware that we actually have a specific directive from the mayor. This process has evolved through conversations, so that might be a good step to just try to formalize what we're doing. But I think the understanding is pretty clear that we are looking at our existing arts funding situation, thinking about where we want to go from here and what it will take in the near term and the medium term to get us there.
Yeah, I understand that. I just want to make sure that as I think about the conversation that we had today, and we talked about a whole lot.
Yeah.
that, as Mr. Winston said, and I agree with him, that somehow we able to bucket the priorities and not reinvent the wheel, but and I'll reiterate again that we try not, although this is really complicated, but we find a way to narrowly tailor what we're going to do and make sure that it's grass top and grassroots, but that we just kind of focus the work. I got notes everywhere. So.
Yeah. Well, with that, guys, we are so ad hoc that we don't even have a meeting schedule laid out. So I will get that to you. I'll talk with the mayor a little bit about our conversation, have follow-up conversations with you all, and try to get a schedule lined up so that we can all continue the conversation.
Okay. Thank
I'm
you.
trying to find
Thank
the
you.
email from the mayor, but I can't find it that explains.
Okay.
It. So, yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.